The Four Foodies, Part 1. Once upon a time, there were some friends who lived in a town in La La Land, but far, far away from Yellow Forest. They lived beyond the desert that Roostus had seen on his quest. They lived on the other side of Mount Scoliosis. And their names, were Regina, Gretchen, Bob, and Stuart. And the reason they had become friends is because they all worked in the same restaurant. It was a Mexican restaurant named Los Tacos Ricos, and they all worked in the kitchen together. Regina's job was to make the guacamole. Gretchen chopped the onions. Bob cooked the tortillas, and Stuart was in charge of desserts. So that every day they would go to work, and they would make food, and they would serve it to the customers there. But there was one customer who was always rude. He would come in and make demands for a certain meal, and when they would bring it to him, he would say, "Is this organic? Does this have gluten? I can't eat this junk. Make it again without the tortilla," and things like that. And it always frustrated the four friends to have such an unpleasant customer with such unusual and frankly inappropriate demands. He wasn't allergic to gluten. He didn't have celiac disease. He just wanted to be mean. One day, he came in and he ordered a burrito ahogado, which is a way of saying a burrito covered in salsa. And when they brought it to him, he said, "This burrito has a tortilla." And Bob, who had made the tortilla, said, "Well, of course it does. What's a burrito without a tortilla?" And the man said, "I am sick and tired of this place." And he suddenly stood up and took off his jacket, and underneath he was wearing a costume. And he put on a mask, and he said, "I am the evil Dr. Gluten, and I am going to destroy this restaurant." And he pulled a little vial out of his backpack, out of his pocket. Do you know what a vial is? Yeah. It's like a tiny little bottle. And he threw it on the floor. And smoke came out, and Bob and Stuart and Regina and Gretchen all started coughing. And then they fell asleep, and Dr. Gluten disappeared. And when they woke up, everything was different. They didn't know why, but everything felt different. And nobody else was in the restaurant. Now, Dr. Gluten was a scientist, but he used science for bad purposes. He thought that the potion in the vial that he had thrown was going to destroy the restaurant and kill the four friends. But actually, it did something very different. It gave the four friends magical powers. So when they woke up, they decided to close the restaurant and go home, since it was late and nobody was there anyway, and they felt strange from having fallen asleep. So they started walking home, and as they walked, they talked. "What was that all about?" said Stuart. "That guy was so mean. And didn't he, do something weird before we all fell asleep?" "I don't remember," said Gretchen, "but I seem to think so." They couldn't remember exactly what had happened. "I feel weird," said Regina. "Me too," said Bob. And they walked, and Regina, who was walking ahead of the others, saw a car coming around the corner, and it was coming fast, and she knew that she was going to miss it, but it was going to hit her friends. And she didn't know how to stop them, so she turned around, and said, "Stop!" and put her hand out like this. And all of a sudden, out of her hand, shot some goopy green stuff. And it stopped, and she shot it at her friends, and her friends, it glued their feet to the ground because it was so thick and they couldn't move. And the car came zooming right in front of where they were. And if they had kept moving, it would have hit them. But she saved them. "What was that?" said Bob. "I don't know," said Regina. "I don't know what happened. I just turned around to try and warn you, and I put out my hand, and that stuff shot out." "Stuff," said Stuart. "This is guacamole." And that's the end of our story for tonight.